立法會主席。
The President. Good morning. We continue with the motion debate on further enhancing the housing ladder. Dr. Man-kwong. President, first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Vincent for moving the motion and the other 6 members for moving amendments. Well, having a safe home and is of the greatest concern to the public. Now, before we didn't have enough land, so housing became a deep-rooted issue that needs addressing it as soon as possible. And now the government has boosted quantity and speed to produce houses, so there are various short-term measures to fill the short-term gaps. And to that effect, the government announced the introduction of 30,000 light public housing units and 1,000 transitional housing units. So that's so there's improvement in the backloaded public housing supply problem. In the next 6 years, together with TLPH, there will be 189,000 public housing units. And then there will be land too for building 80,000 private housing units. In the latest policy address, the chief executive announced that the government would introduce legislation to address the SDU problem. SDUs that are up to standard will be renamed basic housing units. Substandard SDUs will be phased out progressively until there are no more substandard SDUs. That shows the government has determination to address the needs of the public in terms of housing. Over the years, the BPA and myself have been suggesting to the government that it should speed up the supply of various types of public and private housing. The government must also review the housing ladder and review the ratio of the different types of housing supply. So I think the government must respond to the housing needs of the different strata of the community. The aim is to improve their housing condition. So the measures include: 1, we want to boost the turnover of public housing units. So there must be action to combat public tenancy abuse. At the same time, there must be more supply of housing for people to buy their homes. And then there must also be redevelopment of the old estates. The government could consider inviting developers to participate in the redevelopment of public housing estates. So, for example, some of the public housing estates could be redeveloped into private sector participation subsidized housing. And then the government should also expand the scale of HOS, home ownership scheme. And there should be enhancement of effective measures that help the public to buy homes, such as the starter home scheme or the sandwich class scheme and so on. And then the government needs to think out of the box. It could consider working with developers to build small housing units. So for eligible young households, they could either buy or rent these units. This is to help young people to buy their home as the first step. And then the starter home scheme should be relaunched, so young people could make use of their MPF accrued benefits to buy a home. And then other facilities such as the previous isolation facilities and so on, or community hospitals could be turned into youth hostels, so young people could save up while they live in these hostels. And then there's a need to enhance the transitional housing policy. And government should make use of MIC to speed up TH production. And then there must be proper conversion proper, and there should be proper arrangements so that for those staying in TH, they will be allocated PRH, and they won't have to move back to SDUs. And then we could achieve better social benefits. Thank you.
Mr. Cheung-wing, thank you, President. Housing is an important issue. According to an affordability report, the home prices in Hong Kong to the median wage is 16.7 times, and we have the most unaffordable housing in the world. The Chief Executive proposed in the policy address to enhance the housing ladder. One purpose to enhance the housing ladder is to encourage people to buy their own homes. Increase in home prices can help increase the asset of people, and this is a common wealth management tool. Owning a home can allow people to have a sense of belonging to the city. Currently, we have public rental housing units as well as subsidized flats and private housing. Currently, the government proposes to adjust the ratio of PRH to subsidized flats to 50-50. This is to allow people who are eligible to get subsidized flats in the future 10 years. 410,000 units of private housing will be built. I suggest that the government increase the ratio of private housing. PRH is a way for people to get onto the housing ladder. For those wealthy tenants, they should release or vacate their flats, and they should be encouraged to get subsidized flats or private housing units. So these three types of housing help enrich the housing ladder. To help young people or other types of people to buy private housing, mortgage is an important tool. The banks should consider enhancing the mortgage repayment period. For a property worth $5 million, the monthly mortgage should be $16,500. If you extend the repayment period to 40 years, then people can repay $2,000 less every month. With increase of income every month, it would be easy for people to repay their mortgage loan. There are lots of buildings that are aged 40 or 50 years above in Hong Kong. With good maintenance and repair works, their structures remain steady. The government should consider extending the mortgage repayment period based on the quality of the flats or buildings, and this can help inject vitality into the property market. The government should consider extending the mortgage default guarantee period to 50 years. To enhance housing ladder, there should be more measures to boost turnover of PRH units so that people who are capable of getting a private housing unit, they should vacate their flats. Then this will ensure effective use of public resources. We should address the housing needs of people of different social classes to ensure the sense of well-being. Thank you. Mr. Ronald Chen, President, housing has been a top priority for the current term government. This involves housing supply, housing needs, as well as the economic condition of Hong Kong. The Chief Executive has proposed a number of measures to offer help to different social classes in his policy address. I thank Mr. Vincent Chang for moving this motion so that we can have a discussion about this. We have a lack of land, and because of other problems as well, there is a lack of supply of housing, and private home prices are expensive, and we also don't have enough land for construction of housing. The government is adopting a multi-pronged approach, including opening up restricted zone as well as developing the fringe area of country parks. There are different considerations. We should not just look at the number of housing units to be supplied, we should also look at the size of the flats. We had imbalance of demand and supply of housing. That's why we have shoebox flats as well as cage units. And this is considered to be a conflict or root cause of disputes. 65,000 young people aged 25 or below are currently living in inadequate housing. I'm happy to see that in the policy address it is proposed that there will be basic housing units so that people can live in small flats with dignity. The government is heading towards the right direction in general. However, if the government is to implement these policies, that will affect some 240,000 subdivided unit tenants. And landlords may pass on the cost to these tenants if they are to renovate their flats. So the government should ensure that these SDU tenants will not be rendered homeless by rehousing them. In the future 5 years, the overall public housing supply will reach 189,000, and this is an increase of 80% compared to the previous administration. I believe this is the results yielded by the current term government. As long as the government can continue to combat abuse of public housing, we can resume to the housing supply level by 2026 to 2027 compared to a few years ago. With high construction costs, the government should consider adjusting the ratio of subsidized flats to public housing units. The Housing Authority in the early 1980s wrote out the home purchasing scheme, and this allowed PRH tenants to buy back their units, and this also allowed more people to own their homes. I urged the government to manage these home purchasing scheme estates and this will address the aspiration of home ownership of PRH tenants. In the past, most of the resources were dedicated to the grassroots, and over 10 years' time, there were no building of HOS flats because half of the units were public housing units. However, people can't afford private housing, so the waiting time for PRH units is getting longer. However, due to alienation restrictions and other factors, it's been hard for the government to boost the turnover of PRH units. The government should strike a balance and think about boosting the turnover of secondary HOS flats. For the private housing market, we don't have enough time to talk about it today. Mr. Chen Kim-po mentioned about lengthening the mortgage repayment period. This may be one of the solutions. And in some other places in the world, they advocate a principal moratorium approach. This may also be a solution. Housing has to do with people's sense of well-being as well as the harmony of our society. The government should step up efforts to ensure that the measures can be implemented. I so submit. Thank you. Dr. Frankie An. Housing and home ownership of young people has been the concern of a lot of people. There are measures such as youth hostels as well as more quotas for the white form scheme for young people. In the policy address, one-person applicants as well as some young people can be given extra ballot number, and this shows the determination of the government to address the housing problem. However, home prices are still high. We see a slight drop in home prices. However, young people still can't afford private housing, and this deter them from forming a family or getting married. Some young people say that no matter how much the home prices drop, it's still very expensive. It's more practical for the government to roll out more public housing units. Home ownership is the dream of a lot of young people. However, the high home prices is making them unable to achieve their dreams. Enhancing the housing ladder is a pressing issue, especially for young people and the sandwich class. They cannot afford private homes and their income does not meet the requirement to apply for youth hostels or PRH units, so they can only expect to get HOS flats. However, it's hard for them to be allocated an HOS flat either. We think that there should be a youth hostel scheme which should be rented lower than the market rental level. Youth hostels as well as different youth home ownership schemes have room for improvement. Currently, the rent of youth hostels compared to the accommodation in the locality, it's about 60% of the market price. However, after paying rent, young people do not have a lot of money left for down payment. We suggest that after charging young people 60% of the market rent, the government helps save up the money for young people, and this can be a way for young people to save money for down payment. Also, the number of youth hostel units has been increased to 3,000. However, every year we have 30,000 graduates from university. So I hope the government can continue to enhance speed, quantity, quality, and efficiency so that youth hostel scheme participants can get onto the housing ladder. For the tenure, currently the 5-year tenancy agreement is too short. We hope that the young people can be allowed to live in youth hostels for 8 to 10 years. Youth hostels are under the purview of the HYAB. For the white form scheme, it is under the Housing Bureau. Different housing schemes do not align with each other, so I hope that the youth hostel scheme should fall under the purview of the Housing Bureau. For young people with higher income, the government should roll out tax concessions for them. For example, tax duties for homes that are worth $10 million should be exempted for people of the starter homes project. Young people is our future. The housing problems they face have to do with the stability and prosperity of our society. If they can live in a good living environment without concerns and worries, this will help with the development of our society. So the government should help young people own their own homes. Thank you.
Ms. Eunice President, I speak in part of the motion moved by Mr. Vincent Cheung on further enhancing the housing ladder. The government has all along strived to enhance the housing ladder through different housing policies and to improve people's living conditions. However, we still have serious housing issues, especially those faced by sandwich class and the grassroots people. First of all, the time taken for developing land is long. So I think that the government should review how we can shorten the time taken to develop land. Because of this issue, it's difficult for us to increase housing supply substantially over the short run. In the interim, the living conditions of our people is still not ideal. Under new policies, I see that the government is trying to make use of transitional housing to improve people's conditions or living conditions. I think that the transitional housing can be a kind of housing with low rentals that offer an other choice for the people. So I think that the government should rehouse these people properly and adopt a people-oriented approach. Currently, the subsidized sale flat policy cannot take care of the needs of the sandwich class, especially young people. Young people's income has been increasing. However, the property price has increased by 4 times. The rate of increase of income cannot catch up with that of the property prices. That affect the upward mobility of the people, and that is not conducive to the long-term development of the private property market. I think that the government should be more proactive to lower the threshold for home purchase for sandwich class. Maybe we should improve the ballot systems of the subsidized sale flat. At the same time, we can offer a rental first and purchase later kind of scheme. By this, we can assist and help more people meet their home ownership aspirations. However, there is an abuse of PRH, and that lengthened the waiting time for grassroots people who wanted to get hold of a PRH unit. The government is now stepping up in combating tenancy abuse of PRH so that these resources can be allocated to those in need. I think that the administration should improve the distribution mechanism of PRH. Instead of allocating PRH based on the waiting time, maybe the government should establish a marking scheme. Subsidized sale flat is the second run on the housing ladder. The government should strike a balance between boosting turnover and combating speculation. Subsidized sale flat should not just stay at the first rung of the housing ladder. We should allow people to choose the property that they need. Only by boosting the turnover can we encourage people to move up the housing ladder. A lot of members talked about young people. They are our future. The government should focus on the housing needs of these youth. I think that the government should provide a dedicated quotas for young people. For example, the enhanced youth hostel schemes to help people, especially young people, meet their home ownership aspirations. They are our innovative force. Helping them to own a home will allow them to have a base in Hong Kong. I think that we should also step up and financial management education among them. Overall speaking, with the serious housing issues, the government should adopt a multi-pronged approach. When we increase housing supply, we should also adopt short-term measures to improve the housing ladder. We should take care of the young people, sandwich class, and grassroots people in particular. We should provide targeted support, and only by this we can we enhance the sense of gain and well-being among the people. Next, Mr. Chan Pui-lan. Thank you, President. Having a home is the aspiration of all people in Hong Kong. The central authority leaders have said multiple times that we have to address people's concerns and difficulties earnestly. I thank Mr. Vincent Chang for moving the motion so that we can talk about how we can enhance the housing ladder so that people can live in peace and contentment. To assist people own a home, apart from building houses, the government have increased the types of subsidized sale flats. Between HOS and PRH, there is a GSH. And we also have a starter home projects to meet the housing or home ownership aspirations of the people. The government has adopted a multi-pronged approach to increase housing supply. They have shortened the time for land development. In the coming 10 years, the housing supply target will be 440,000. Among them, 308,000 will be PRH. Having enriched the housing ladder with the change in the economy, the property prices have gone down. But for sandwich class people, it's still difficult for them to own a home. The major reason is that the rate of increase of income cannot catch up with inflation. From 2003 to 2023, people aged between 15 and 34, their rate of increase for their income is between 99 to 131%, but the property price have increased 4 times during that period over the past 20 years. In the housing supply, the private housing amount to 40%, but subsidized sale flat only account for 10% of the total supply. So getting hold of a subsidized sale flat is like winning a Mark 6. So a lot of people would rather lie flat and wait for a PRH units, and that is not healthy. The average waiting time for PRH is at its peak. I think that the government should ensure that there is sufficient PRH supply, but the percentage of sandwich class account to about 36.6%. We should accord priority to their home ownership aspirations and their needs. We should strike a balance between a subsidized sale flat and PRH units. In the policy address, it is said that the Housing Authority will adjust the ratio between PRH and SSF. It will be adjusted from 70 to 30 to 60-40, and they will allocate an extra ballot number to those who have repeatedly made attempts to purchase SSF. Apart from increasing SSF and boosting turnover, G19 has been advocating for extending the default guarantee period to 50 years to unleash WSM supply. The transactions have increased by 1.4 times. However, most of them is in the secondary market. So I'm glad that in the report published by the Housing Authority on long-term housing strategy, they will increase the quotas for WSM to allow sandwich class to own a home. Lastly, the demand for housing will change with times. Previously, we see purchasing a flat as a way to boost our wealth. However, with the interest rate hike, the mortgage payment is increasing. Young people no longer see home ownership as one of their aspirations. A lot of young people see being able to travel as one of their motivations to work. With a change in mindset, coupled with the gloomy economy, I think that the government should first work on the economy to boost confidence of people in the property market. We should be flexible in adjusting our demand, adjusting our supply so that it can match our demand. And we should help people to own a home. I so submit. Ms. Chen Hao-yan. Thank you, President. The housing supply issue has been the focus of the last few terms of the government. The problem cannot be solved in a year or two. I thank Mr. Vincent Cheng for moving the motion so that we can talk about the subject matter in detail. Our population structure is complicated. We have a supply and demand imbalance, along with other issues. Apart from solving the issue progressively, it also takes time, and we have to be patient and determined. We cannot we cannot give up on solving issues that are difficult. A lot of members talked about housing policies. Now, I'd like to talk about basic housing units and substandard SDUs. In the policy address, the chief executive proposes to eradicate SDUs. There are people who support it and there are people who are against it. Some people think that the rental will increase after the SDUs will be replaced by BHU, and there are also people who say that landlords may choose not to comply with the regulations and force the tenants out. Of course, we cannot completely avoid these from happening, but SDU is the biggest issue that we have in terms of housing. Because of the lack of alternatives, we can only allow substandard SDUs to exist. But with the efforts of various sectors, we see that the public housing supply will increase. Coupled with the transitional housing and light public housing, there is conditions for us to deal with the issues of substandard SDU seriously. I am glad that this term of the government is determined enough to eradicate the substandard SDUs. And this is how the government faces the problem squarely. For us to solve the issue, we have to use new resources to help people who are affected. There are 18,000 transitional housing, and in the coming 2 years, there will be 3,000 additional transitional housing units to meet people's housing need. There are already people living in transitional housing units, but with a stable supply of public housing, and as the government is planning to build 30,000 light public housing, there will be units made available for SDU tenants to move in. Some people criticize the fact that some transition housing are located in remote areas. Over the past 2 years, I have organized over 10 visits to transitional housing together with NGOs. A lot of SDU tenants, after visiting these transitional housing units, are willing to move in, and they even apply at site. The transitional housing's living environment is much better than subdivided units, and the rentals are much lower. I think that we already have ways for us to help these SDUs tenants. When there is a greater demand for alternatives to SDU, we should leverage on business sector. We should encourage enterprises with renovation, engineering, and architecture backgrounds to contribute to help SDUs to convert into basic housing units. Maybe we can convert industrial building units into basic housing units. When I was young, I lived in inadequate housing. We didn't have 24-hour supply of fresh water. Do we still want our next generation to live in a space of some 10 square meters? Do we want our children to do their homework in toilets? If not, we have to stay determined to encourage more enterprises to lend a hand. Also, we should increase the supply. Please stop speaking. Thank you.
Mr. Tang Ka-piu. Thank you, President. Mr. Vincent Cheng has moved the motion on further enhancing the housing ladder. Members of the FTU have moved amendments. Now, because we want to share our thoughts and address the issues that we need to tackle. And also, we want to show that we fully support the phasing of SDUs. But then the focus should be on affording children protection first. So what does that mean? In the past year, Ms. Winnie Ho and her team had many rounds of discussion with us. We pointed out that we estimated that about 40% of those living in SDUs are singletons. So their housing needs are not the same as those of households. Some, for financial reasons, choose to stay at SDUs, and others actually have their own homes or that they share, say, with their parents, but they want to be near where they work, so they move into SDUs. But then for households with children, almost 90% of those SDU households are applying for public rental housing, and they just don't have a choice but to stay in SDUs. Now, Dr. Yi Pak-keung, a good friend of mine, says that if a child lives in such a poor living condition, it affects their intellectual development, their emotions, their spine, even their eyesight. So, of course, it's necessary that they be lifted out of their condition as soon as possible. That's why we must give priority to such households. Now, Miss Rebecca Chen, lived in the Ward Kowloon City, so the conditions poor. I lived in Tai Hing Estate. In those days, there was not yet the Two Moon Road, so we were far away from a main road. And still, there's a great harmony in the neighborhood. You know, say there were 12 households on the same floor. Each household had children. So we might live far away, but then it was a harmonious community. So that's why we support transitional housing and interim housing. Well, even though they are in Tuen Mun on the North District, what's wrong with that? Now, I lived in Tai Hing Estate 40 years ago. Now I'm a legislator. So what's wrong with that? So you think that, so we're talking about households who don't have a choice. They have to stay as SDUs, in particular, the new arrivals. We want to give them better choices. And definitely that is good for the development of the children. Don't think that they have no choice, but they are stuck in Appendix Street or Peck Hall Street. No, it doesn't work that way. And there's another issue that the government is surely aware of. Now, we know you are aggressive in setting the area, the minimum area at 8 square meters. Imagine it's a house of 3 living in 8 square meters. Do you think that's acceptable? Because in future, the basic housing units, BHUs, are considered up to standard, and then owners pay property tax and rates. So, but then what is our policy for households of children living in BHUs? That's why the FTU has put forward this concept of targeted poverty alleviation. That means, well, if landlord rents BHU units to households with children or the elderly, they should declare to the SAR government. It's not that we don't allow them to rent the units to these households, but if there is a declaration, the government will have information. They can't tell us anymore that, well, I don't know where these households are. So what does it mean? If the government knows where they are, that means services could be provided. And then you could invite them to visit transition housing. So they know they don't have choices. They are not stuck in these 8 square meter BHUs. So there are better housing. There's better housing, and children could grow up more safely and happily. And in these other housing, there will be services for them. So please stop. Mr. Kwok Wai Kang. Thank you, President. I would like to thank Mr. Vincent Cheng for moving this motion so this council could have a debate. FTU always supports that housing is what people live in, not for speculation. We've asked the government to consider the Singaporean housing model so that we could have a green farm market here. For subsidized sale flats, eventually they'll become private housing. And they will become expensive because of speculation in the private market of units nearby. Now, yesterday, Mr. Louis Leung from the real estate sector said something similar, although the considerations are not the same. But at the end, the result is we will be gradually building a green farm market. And then property prices will be more stable for the eligible to buy their first homes. Now, we fully endorse the past effort of the government. This is the 10th anniversary of the long-term housing strategy. If we look back at the past decade, the LTHS exposed the problem that we short of land supply, and that's a slow housing production. And now starting from 2024-25, we see that housing production will be expedited, and then now we've also identified sufficient land. So that it's not easy task, but we're seeing progress. The LTHS advocates that public housing should be the backbone, and then there will, and it's complemented by subsidized sale flat, and the private market is also another source of supply. Now, as some members pointed out, housing is the most unaffordable in the world. We're talking 16.7 times of income. That means people have to save up for 16.7 years without eating and drinking before they could save up all the income for buying a unit. Now, we're all asking how can we help? If we talk about enhancing the housing ladder, already we have a PRH, HOS, GSH, tenant purchase scheme, and private housing. So there are many steps or rungs already up the housing ladder. But if we want to brainstorm, we could consider the UK scheme where there's a sharing of ownership. That is turning private units into something like HOS, because the government will buy about a quarter of the title of private housing, and then tenants pay rents, and they could also gradually redeem the 1/4 title, so that lessens the pressure on first-time home buyers. So this is the UK experience. It's for our reference, of course. We could consider if there are other ways to enrich the housing ladder further. Now, most believe that the middle class should aim for buying a home. That's kind of momentum for upward mobility. Now, the middle class yearns for upward mobility, probably because they want better housing and better quality of life. But then when the middle class buy a home, the first thing they face is decline in their quality of life, because they are spending most of their income on mortgage payment. So the government should bear that in mind. Now, President Xi Jinping cares much about Hong Kong. He mentioned that Hong Kong people yearn for a better life. They yearn for bigger housing units. So this should be the goal of the government. This is also the aspiration of the people. By enhancing the housing ladder, we can then provide more choices to young people in the middle class. Thank you. Mr. Kitson-Yang. Thank you, President. I would like to thank Mr. Vincent Cheng for moving the motion on further enhancing the housing ladder, and I would also like to thank the other members for their amendments. This gives us the opportunity to give our views on enhancing the housing ladder. Now, people will feel secure if they have a home, and then they can have a happy life. But then most people are bothered by trying to own a home. Now, if we can address the housing issue, people will have a better sense of happiness. So to address the housing issue, we must first enhance the housing ladder. So people for different sector and strata could have different choices. So the biggest goal is for people in the different rungs of the housing ladder to address their housing needs. Now, of course, we see the government has done much to build this ladder. We have transitional housing, light public housing, tenant purchase scheme, GSH, and so on. So with this ladder, it offers various choices to the public. But then it doesn't mean with the ladder there could be upward mobility or people will be able to get housing. So we have to consider several things. One, can we increase the supply of subsidized sale flats? Now the government is changing the ratio from 70 to 30 to 60 to 30 to 40 for public housing and subsidized housing supply. But that is still not enough to meet the needs. Every year there are about 40,000 green form households applying for HOS or public rental housing or GSH. The figure is more or less stable each year. This year, there are some 6,000 plus GSH units and 6,000 HOS. And in future, on average each year, there will be about 8,000 units. So we're talking about 40,000 households trying to buy the 8,000 units. That means 30 plus thousand people will be disappointed. Now, people want to buy HOS and GSH because they want to move up the housing ladder. But then, and for these households, actually, they will soon become well-off tenants. But at the end, they fail to buy an HOS or a GSH unit, and eventually they are, driven out of the PRH unit, so they have to go to the private market. And this is not what we want to see. That's why we need to increase the supply of subsidized sale flats. Well, it's good that we have revised the ratio, but still there's not enough supply to meet the demand. Well, why is there not enough supply for PRH tenants to buy the subsidized sale flats? It's because there is now a longer waiting time for PRH. But then now we see an increase in supply of subsidized sale flats. That means so with a better. Because of the change in the ratio. So when you change the ratio, that means there'll be more SSRS. That means PRH tenants have better chance to move up the housing ladder. So you need to review your well-off tenants policy for this to happen. Second point, I want to talk about the turnover of HOS in the secondary market. There is poor turnover. Each year there are people going to the market through the WSM. So that's why second-hand HOS flats are fetching higher and higher prices. And second-hand HOS costs double the price of first-hand HOS. So why is it that the HOS market, well, I wouldn't say that's speculation. I think it's important that we keep the HOS market stable. Again, it's because there is not enough turnover. Let's say I buy a large HOS unit, and then my children grow up and they move out. So do I have the chance to switch to a smaller unit, because then that will help turnover? Thank you.
Mr. Tony Che, thank you, President. I speak in support of Mr. Vincent Chang's motion. Back in 2013, in this council, I urged the government to review the housing ladder in Hong Kong to address the housing needs of people from different strata. This is to provide more incentives for people who are affordable to buy private homes to boost turnover of PRH units. The original motion is in line with the amendments. Also in 2013, in a newspaper article, I mentioned that we should regulate subdivided units. In 2018, I mentioned about that the government should enhance the balloting system of subsidized flats. So for unsuccessful applicants, they should be given extra ballot number. And in 2010, I realized that the government focused too much on public housing, and therefore young people and a lot of other people lied flat. Therefore, I suggested adjusting the ratio of PRH to subsidized flats. At the same time, the government should combat the abuse of public housing. I'm glad that a lot of the policies are now being implemented now. I'm glad that the current term government is willing to listen to people's views to make improvement. Now, what we need to do is to implement all these policy initiatives and take forward the housing projects with a fiscal deficit as well as fewer private developers bidding for land. We have to think of solutions. Some people say that with a fiscal deficit, the government should stop creating land and stop constructing housing units. I agree that we should take into account the market situation as the government take forward its projects. However, we should also learn from the experiences and lessons we had 10 to 20 years ago. And so the government should not stop entirely creating land. Even with sufficient land, it doesn't mean that the government needs to build housing units right away. It should take into consideration people's affordability as well as the market situation. It is only that the government has enough land that it has the say and the ability to ensure that the housing market can remain healthy. Weeks ago, I moved a motion about making good use of land to ensure economic development. I also proposed that the government should make use of land to ensure urban renewal. The government should safeguard SDU tenants who are affected by the government measures to eradicate subdivided flats. The government should tackle the problem of aging population. People are moving from old buildings to new development areas, and this is one way to help people move up the housing ladder. Another way of upward mobility is to allow people to live in better and more spacious environment. Based on a recent estimate and survey, I think the survey really focuses just on the number of housing units. I think with more housing units, the government should think about enhancing the quantity as well as the quality of people's housing. Back in 10 years ago, I already said the government should think about the per capita area of housing unit. I so submit. Thank you. Ms. Judy Chen. Thank you, President. Housing problems is one thing that we need to tackle in Hong Kong urgently. This has to do with our people's living quality. Before we resume the legislative session, I was invited by an organization to visit some family households living in subdivided units. I experienced myself what poor families are like. There is poor ventilation and poor living environment, and kitchens and toilets are combined in these subdivided flats. There are also fire safety concerns in subdivided flats. These people struggle every day in order to make a living, and they all have to squeeze in this narrow space. These are sad stories behind the prosperity of the city. A lot of grassroots families, they cannot afford high rent. That's why they have to force themselves to live in these poor living environments. If we allow our future generation to live in such environments, our young generation would have very few hopes about the city. Currently, we have 110,000 households living in subdivided units. We're talking about at least 200,000 people. They struggle every day in these subdivided flats. They are in dire situations, and we need to urgently address their housing needs. President, phasing out subdivided units is a common vision of the community. We have to work hard to improve the living environment of the grassroots. This is our common goal, and I'm happy that the current term government, as well as the Secretary for Housing, Ms. Winnie Ho, is determined to tackle the housing problems as well as the deep-seated conflicts. We see that the government is committed to eradicating subdivided units. This is not an easy task. It requires our concerted effort as well as determination. The government is converting SDUs into basic housing units. This is a good policy. There are many views and concerns about this new measure, and I understand these views. Some say that landlords are going to renovate the subdivided flats, and this will render the tenants homeless, and that landlords will increase the rent, and SDU tenants will not be able to afford the high rent. I understand that we cannot make basic housing units happen in one day. So the government needs to explain to the public about this new policy. At the same time, the government has to be prepared. It has to provide homes or temporary accommodation for tenants who are affected by this new policy, so that we will not increase the burden of these SDU tenants. I hope the government can allow people to have more discussions about this, and that it will take on board people's views, so that people who live in substandard SDUs can have their living environment improved. While the government is thinking about how to increase housing supply, it should proactively combat the abuse of public housing. Over the past 2 years, 5,000 PRH units have been recovered under this scheme. This is great, and I hope the government can continue to enhance the housing ladder. Together with the housing authority, I hope that we can create a better living environment and better lives for our people, so that there will be more harmony in our society. I speak in support of the motion. I so submit. Thank you, President. Mr. Martin Liu. Deputy President, housing problems have been a deep-seated problem in Hong Kong. People live in small and expensive spaces. The per capita living area of people in Hong Kong is about 172 square feet. This is much lower than that of other advanced economies. While home prices have dropped slightly, the latest surveys show that for 14 years in a row, Hong Kong has been a place with unaffordable home prices. People, including our young generation, have not been able to buy their own homes. A latest survey shows that over 70% of the Z generation, that is, young people aged 18 to 27, think that traveling is a motivation for them. This is a much higher priority compared to getting married or giving birth. 60% of the respondents think that they will never be able to have their own homes. So the government should further enhance the housing ladder to address people's aspiration for home ownership. Currently, there is a problem with our housing ladder because there is a lack of supply of subsidized flats. According to the Census and Statistics Department, the median monthly income of people in Hong Kong is $21,800. With this income, people cannot afford private housing. At the same time, this is higher than the income limit of $12,940 for getting PRH units. So people are stuck in the sandwich class. We have over 1 million households who are regarded as the sandwich class. These people need subsidized flats. We recently see that the subsidized flats are oversubscribed by 18 times. In 2019, they were oversubscribed by 60 times. I'm glad that the government is adjusting the ratio of PRH to subsidized flats from 70 to 30 to 60 to 40. However, the supply of subsidized flats is a drop in the bucket now. With a lack of supply, people waiting for PRH has to wait for a long time, and other people can't have their own homes. The government should further adjust the ratio of PRH to subsidized flats to 50-50 to address people's needs. Apart from increasing supply, the government is going to roll out basic housing units to improve SDU tenants' living environment. It's been less than a month since the policy address is announced, and there are reports saying that landlords have to take back their SDUs and they are evicting the SDU tenants, and this renders SDU tenants homeless. I hope that the government can make use of interim housing as well as transitional housing to provide temporary accommodation for SDU tenants affected. While basic housing units may help improve people's living environments, however, they are still considered as shoebox units. 8 square feet is slightly larger than the 7 square meter large prison units in Hong Kong. I believe people have no choice, and that's why they have to live in SDUs. I hope that basic housing units is not the end point of the government's policy. I hope the government will further enhance the housing ladder. Providing people with a rooftop is just the basic thing that the government needs to do. Most people want to have a good home. I hope the government can continuously enhance the housing ladder so that people can live in peace and that SDUs can be entirely phased out. Thank you.
Mr. Chen Hao-feng, thank you, President. On behalf of DAB, I thank this term of the government for their efforts in resolving our housing issues, especially when it comes to subdivided units. They have dedicated much effort, and I see determination. Every term of the government tries to solve this issue, but why is the issue still not resolved yet? Just now, the Deputy President pointed out a very important function of housing, which is wealth accumulation. How do we make housing a rung in the ladder to allow people to move upward? Over the years, the government has been increasing the types of housing that they offer. In the beginning, we have PRH, HOS, starter homes, GSH, transitional housing, like public housing, basic housing units, tenants purchase schemes, so on and so forth. With so many types of housing offered, can we actually help people move upward? and move up the housing ladder. I thank Mr. Vincent Cheng for moving the motion so that we can discuss it further. A lot of members here grew up in subsidized sale flat and public housing, myself included, and Secretary for Housing also grew up in public housing. Through public rental housing units, the government tried to help people accumulate wealth and save so that they can move upward, so that they can purchase an HOS unit and proceed to private housing. But how do we move upward after living in PRH units for a family of 4 with parents with 2 children? After living in PRH units 20 years, those who used to be kindergartens would have grown up to become a university student, and their income would have exceeded the limit. As soon as their income exceeded the limit, they would become well-off tenants. These people would ask me what they should do. I would ask them to kick or remove the children from the register. But where should these children move to? When these kids have not been married, they will have to rent in the private market. Given the low income of these people, they are not able to save up to purchase a flat. Eventually, they will have to queue for PRH units. I think that this situation is rather twisted. I think the government should look into it. After living in PRH units for some 20 years, they would have saved up enough money to purchase a flat. I think that there are only 5,000 to 6,000 quotas of GSH for PRH tenants. And given the quotas, there will be still 20,000 people who cannot get a hold of a PRH units. We propose a tenant purchase scheme 2.0. For people to stay in their PRH units, they don't have to remove their children from the register, and they can purchase the flat that they rent. This is a rent first and purchase later kind of model. You can sell the flat to the tenants who have lived there for 20 years so that their children can get the flat. I hope that the government will adopt our proposal of a tenant purchase scheme 2.0. In the amendment proposed by Mr. LOONG, it is said that we should tighten the alienation restrictions of subsidized sale flat, regardless of how many years the tenants or owners have purchased the flat for. There is already alienation restrictions. Within 20 years upon purchase, the owners can only resell the property to other people's at the selling price, and only after 10 years can they sell the flat in the private market. I think, well, the DAB does not see a need to tighten the alienation restrictions. However, Mr. LOONG is only saying that the government should consider it. Please pause here. Dr. Taek Ji-yoon. Deputy President, the housing policy should return to basics. Housing is a human right. The government should not confuse home ownership and housing needs. For people to live in contentment, they don't have to own a home. There are 3 problems to our housing policies. The government attaches too much importance to housing ladder and ignore the housing needs of the people. There are some 23,000 new housing completed, with only 9,500 public housing, which account to about 40% of the total housing. There are only 3,000 odd SSF in the market, which account to only 40% of the public housing. The government is proposing to replace PRH by SSF. This may lower the cost for government, but that will reduce the choice that people have. And that has ignored the fact that a lot of people don't have the ability to purchase a home. I think that the government should set clear directions. The SSF, well, the ratio of PRH should not be less than 70%, and we should legislate to restrict the ratio, and there should be KPIs to make sure that the government deliver. And there are also a lot of vacant flats on the market. There are some 52,000 one-hand vacant flat in the primary market. This shows that the developers are trying to accumulate flats to control supply of private housing. The government cannot effectively control the primary market. I think that the government should adopt 3 measures. First, they should legislate vacancy tax. Second, the government should ask the developers to sell the flat upon receipt of occupation permit. Third, we should establish a register of vacant flats to increase transparency. With the increase of rent, it's difficult for people to be alleviated from poverty. According to a study, the income accounts for about 30% of SDU households' income. The ratio of rent is higher for low-earning families. For some SDU's household with $18,000 of monthly income, their rent amount to $5,200, will account to about 30% of their income. Among the households, the rent account to about 30% of their income. According to JobsDB's report, the average income increase is about 3.2% only. According to RNVD, the private rental index has increased by 6.9%, which is a 5-year high. In other words, the rate of increase for rent is 2 times of the rate of increase for income. Last year, the CPI increased by only 2.3%. However, the private rental rate of increase is 1 times. This is a vicious cycle. The high rent eats into our income. Grassroots families cannot accumulate wealth. The income rate of increase cannot catch up with that of inflation, and it's difficult for people to be alleviated from poverty. So I have a few suggestions. First of all, we should make reference to the RNVD valuation, and we should set initial rent. Second, there should be a linkage between rent and income. The rate of increase for rent should not exceed that of inflation. Third, we should establish a rent control mechanism. Fourth, we should increase public housing supply. I think that the government should reposition their housing policy. We should be people-oriented instead of pushing people to purchase a flat. We should make sure that everyone has a place to live and allow people to accumulate wealth. Only by this can the community enjoy a sense of well-being. Ms. Doreen Kong, I thank Mr. Vincent Cheung for moving the motions and other members for moving the amendments. We should improve people's living environment, and we should combat tenancy abuse. All these have become hot topics in Legislative Council meetings. This shows the importance of housing issues among our people. The flats are expensive and small in Hong Kong. A lot of people spend their whole lives to purchase a flat of some 300 square feet. People don't even have a place to hang their clothes to dry or dry their clothes. A lot of people use folding table to dine, and they have to place their miscellaneous items on their table. Some people even have to rent a warehouse to place their items. This shows the actual living conditions of our people. I'm glad to see that this term of the government is trying to solve the long-standing housing issues. I do not question the efforts and determination of the government. However, the housing issue is a deep-rooted problem of ours. We don't have a lot of types of housing, and I think that we have to enhance our housing ladder. We need to have a comprehensive set of housing policies, and there should be clear direction. However, the long-term housing strategy focuses too much on housing supply. It only talks about the fact that we have to identify land and develop land to increase housing supply. In the 1987 long-term housing strategy report, it is said that the housing policy should keep up with the time and meet the aspirations of the people. We should not ignore the group of people that are most in need. The housing policy then focus on redeveloping old and dilapidated housing estate, encourage tenants to purchase a flat. They offer PRH units for the people. Time has changed. We cannot rely on the goal set out in the 1987 long-term housing strategy report. We should eradicate substandard SDUs. We should, having people live in contentment could be an aspiration of ours. Eradicating SDU could be a means to achieve our goal. But what is our strategy? Strategy can point out a direction for us so that our policies can proceed in the right direction. Housing policy should be dynamic and it should change in times. I wonder if the government has taken into account the change in population structure, aging population, when they formulate their housing strategy. Have they taken into account the immigration situation, technological changes, and changes in employment patterns, as well as our integration into the Greater Bay Area and how it affects housing demand in Hong Kong? Has the government made adjustments according to the factors? According to what Seneca, a philosopher, said, if we don't know where we are navigating to, then we would think that all wind blowing towards us would be pointing us to the right direction, but that is not the truth. Housing problem is a deep-rooted issue of ours. I think that the government should formulate the policies that is updated, and I think that we should improve the living conditions and environment for our people. President, I so submit.
Mr. Tang Fei. President, I speak in support of the motion of Mr. Vincent Chang and the amendments of the other members. Now, there are 3 tiers and 9 rungs in the housing ladder. There is a PRH, light public housing, transition housing, and then subsidized sale flats, GHSH, HOS, TPS, public-private sector participation scheme, and the top of the ladder, of course, is private housing. So it's a complicated housing ladder. So it's not true to say that we don't have a housing ladder, but rather the government is trying to enhance the housing ladder. But I think the issues are mostly on 2 aspects. One is in increasing public housing, we need to strike a balance with public finances, the burden on public finances. Second, the private market, how can we ensure prices are stable? Now, from PRH moving up to SSF, there's a short supply of SSF. Many members complain that there's oversubscription. That means there's not enough supply of SSF. The policy address this year says that there will be extra ballot number to boost the chance of success. So that means there is not any substantial boost in supply. And then the policy address also says that there will be tightening of the well-off tenancy. The asset and income limits will be raised. So and then for the HOS to white to green farm ratio will be also revised. So again, it's not increasing supply. It's just that it's making a choice between PRH tenants and non-PRH tenants. So we can't. Someone will still be left disappointed. So such a ratio is because the government's under financial stress. That's why there is a need to make a choice. Now, let's say that we no longer accept speculation to for property markets property prices to soar, and so we're seeing actually an increase in negative asset equity units, and so that means those who own homes suffer financial loss. But when even with that, it doesn't mean more people are able to buy their first homes because the interest rates are high. So if property prices go down, everybody stands to lose. Few would benefit from that. And because of the pessimistic outlook of the property market, so private developers deter from taking part in public-private collaboration. And then there's no optimistic outlook for land sale and disposal. So that's why, again, we need to strike a balance about whether we want property prices to go down or not. Now, when it comes to the governance of Hong Kong, it's like frying a small fish. You can't keep flipping the fish, because the more you do that, then the fish may break into pieces. So the government is now groping in the blind in terms of its long-term housing strategy. And so if we increase substantially the number of particular type of housing on the housing ladder, that means there will be huge financial burden on the government. At the same time, it will interfere with the market. So the government now just take more small steps. That means they only make minor adjustments, and then they try more types of housing on the housing ladder. I think that's fine because it's all about stabilizing property prices. Now, because we want to ensure the middle class will see their property, their assets, remaining well priced, and so it's all about striking a balance. Thank you. Mr. Ben Chen. Thank you. Deputy President. Thank you, Vincent Zhang, for moving this motion on further enhancing the housing ladder. We all see that this government has done much in terms of meeting housing needs. Various measures have been taken. I think people in different strata could see there's progress with SDU. So there's now tenancy control, and also the basic housing units policy has just been announced. And then we also have transitional housing and light public housing. Now, on the housing ladder, the first step or the first half step is the most crucial. Here I'm talking about the temporary shelter and temporary housing. Now, Châtelet Estate Block 10 was used as an interim or temporary housing because people may be displaced by redevelopment or fire and other natural disasters, so people have to move there. Or even for those who suffer from domestic violence, they may have to move out to such temporary housing. So in the housing ladder, there has to be temporary housing. And then eventually these tenants may apply for PRH and they move to PRH. So this is the first half step of the housing ladder. And we're seeing fewer and fewer of such units. The Châtelet temporary housing has been demolished, actually. So then there's now a temporary shelter in Po Tin. I wonder if you've been to that shelter. Here, you only see bunk beds. Men, women all live in the same space. It's crowded. Now, it's clean enough, but really, it's not all that desirable. And then Cheung-wing Estate, Cheung-wing Village, the squatters were, gone in a fire. People were moved to Po Tin, so men and women all stay in the same room. they sleep in bunk beds. So the residents don't see hope. They have to stay there for 3 months. And then if the government confirms that these households have housing needs, then they may see if there is other accommodation for them. And then the situation's improved a bit because NGOs are now running centers for them. But then this is all temporary accommodation, say just for a few years. After that, the centers will have to be demolished, the land will have to be returned to either the government or the landowners. Even for public housing, it's only going to last a few years because the government is going to build more PRH. Hopefully then the waiting time could be shortened. But however short the waiting time is, there is still a need for transition. Now, the transitional housing has been in place for some time. We believe it's really helps. For example, the Cheung-wing fire, people's squatters were burnt, and so they moved to the transitional housing. They were happy because they have alternative accommodation to tie them over. So can transitional housing become a permanent rung on the housing ladder? So for people who lose their homes because of a fire or natural disaster, there's a place for them to tide them over. Don't send them all to Po-Tin. The Po-Tin temporary shelter really is not a good choice as the first half step of the housing ladder. I'd like to raise this matter for the consideration by the government. I hope you will turning transitional housing into your permanent policy. So when people lose their homes all of a sudden, they have somewhere to go. So thank you. Mr. Peter Shiu. Thank you, Deputy President. I would like to thank Mr. Jiang for moving the motion on further enhancing the housing ladder because this is really important. But I think for most in the community that we want to help those with needs. As for the private housing market, we should allow it to operate freely. Now, on the housing ladder, just now as mentioned, we have first of all PRH, and people accrue enough wealth and they could move into either the subsidized sell-flat market or the private market. Now, in the private housing market, there's now a bigger supply, and you have identified sufficient land to build another 300,000 or so units. In the public housing sector, I believe then means there is housing for those in need. And then for those on the waiting list, it's a long wait now, of course. We understand you are working hard to combat tenancy abuse. Hopefully then more units could be made available. Now, some said we shouldn't stigmatize well-off tenants because because of the public housing unit, they're able to accrue wealth. But then when they have accrued wealth, shouldn't they vacate their units for those with real needs? That's something we need to consider. Now, PRH unit costs about $2,100 per month, and in new territories, the rent is as low as $1,400. So for a 3-person household, for instance, that has a median income of $49,000 to about $74,000, and they only need to pay 1.5 times of the rent. And for those earning $74,000 to $123,000 per month, they only need to pay 2 times of the rent. It's only for those that earn above that limit, they have to move out. Now, we all agree public housing is for those in need. And if someone's earning $120,000 and they could still stay in public housing, paying double the rent, in the new territories, that means it's just $2,800. So even legislators would be able to stay as well-off tenants. Do members think we should be given such housing support? So we want well-off tenants to move to the private market, and we must continue to work hard on that. In the policy address, it's been announced that the public-private housing ratio will be revised from 70-30 to 60-40. As for allocation of a subsidized flat, there will be an extra ballot number for certain individuals. I think it's a fair approach. And as for boosting turnover of public housing, well, we've talked about that. Now, in the past year, you recovered 5,000 units, and say if we're talking about 2 to 3 person household, that means another 10,000 and 15,000 people will be able to have a shorter wait for PRH. Just now, Mr. Tang Fei mentioned that there's actually not much increase in subsidized sale flats. It's just about changing the ratio. And then Mr. Louis Loong raised a point. He said we should study that. That is, let's say some PRH tenants buy subsidized sale flats and then they put their flats in the market. There are 2 ways to do so. One is to sell the units to white form or green form holders in the secondary market. The other way is to pay a premium and then can sell the flat in the open market. So we have to consider the principle. Are we trying to help those in need, or are we trying to help everyone? And who are those in need? That means those with low income, and say they are able to buy a flat. It's for them to live in. If they make more money, then they could choose to go into the private market. So why shouldn't the vacated flat be left in the secondary market for others who also have a genuine need? Because then they have a bigger chance of buying a subsidized flat at a good price. Why should the flats be allowed to go into the private market? Because it goes against the intention of the policy. Well, some say that maybe if we allow owners to sell the unit in the open market, they can sell it for a better price. But then here we're talking about subsidized sales flats. They are for those with real needs. Thank you.
Mr. Benson, look. Deputy President, I thank Mr. Vincent Chang for moving this motion on enhancing the housing ladder. I also thank the other members for their amendments. There are 3 rungs in our housing ladder. We have public housing, subsidized flats, as well as private housing. In the past, because of various reasons, the housing ladder cannot allow young people to have their own homes. In 2022, when President Xi visited Hong Kong, in his important speech, he mentioned that one of the biggest aspirations for people in Hong Kong is to have more spacious living environment. We see that the current term government has made a lot of effort in addressing people's needs. For example, 30,000 LPH units have been built. Also, it's trying to speed up the construction of public housing. The waiting time for PRH units has been improved. In the past, it took 5.9 years, and in this year, it was shortened to 5.5 years. The housing supply will reach 189,000, and in the next 10 years, the public housing supply will be 440,000 units. Also, the government has been effectively tackling the problem of abuse of public housing. In the past year, 5,000 PRH units have been recovered, and this is equivalent to a middle-sized housing estate. Our party has provided a lot of suggestions for the government, and one of the suggestions is to help young people have their own homes, to help address one of the challenges, that is home ownership problem. In the latest policy address, we see that there is some hope for our young people. That is, the government is going to help young people buy their homes. For young people aged below 40 in the white form market scheme, for young people applicants as well as one-person applicants, they will be given extra ballot number. Also, young people will be given 1,500 more quotas. Young people who work hard every day, they are going to see hopes in terms of improving their lives. For young people, if they want to buy their homes, they have to save up money, and it takes time. How can our housing ladder address this problem? We have to help young people to buy their homes? How can they, with their own effort, buy their own homes and have their own families? Well, in the summer break, I had a working group meeting with dozens of young people. For young people, they want to get married, they want to give birth, and they want to have their own working and living space. To them, having their own homes is a retirement protection for them. Currently, with our income level, young people can only pay their rent and perhaps settle their living expenses. The MPF savings cannot help settle their rent and living expenditure. So how can we help young people buy their own homes? How can we enrich the housing ladder for them? The BPA has been advocating this. We have been advocating the MPF starter home scheme. We want young people to be able to make use of their MPF savings to buy their first homes. They should be able to use that saving for down payment. Some people say that this is not a huge sum of money, but for a young couple, if they have 2 MPF savings, it should be able to help settle the down payment. If they are able to do that, they will be able to get on the housing ladder, and dozens of years later, they will be able to enjoy better retirement protection. The government should also study building more small to medium-sized flats for young people to buy or rent these flats so that young people can actually own their own homes. Young people, they want to have a space, a good living environment. With their own homes, it's like they have their own future. I think if they are able to have their own homes, they will have a better sense of happiness and well-being. Mr. Michael Lee, Deputy President, in 2022, in the CE's policy address, there are measures to tackle housing problems, and this is a top priority of the current term government, that is to phase out inadequate housing. The government wants people to see hopes. It wants people to live in a more spacious environment. I believe everyone wants to have their own homes. Housing problems have always been a deep-seated issue in Hong Kong. A lot of middle-class people told me that they cannot afford to buy a home. This is because of high interest rates. This is also because that middle-class people, if they want to have their own homes, they can only rely on their parents for down payment. They may apply for PRH units. A lot of young people after graduation, they pick lower paid jobs, or they even tell their supervisors not to increase their income or pay their salary by cash. Some even lie flat because they want to meet the income requirement for applying for PRH units. Is it what we want to see? People lying flat will bring negative forces to our society, and in the long run, this lowers the competitiveness of our city as well as the productivity of Hong Kong. Apart from determining people's eligibility to apply for PRH units based on income level, should we encourage young people to work harder so that they can get on the housing ladder? We welcome the government's new measure providing extra ballot numbers to young people applicants as well as one-person applicants in the white form secondary market scheme so that they can move up the housing ladder. However, should the government be more innovative, there should be ways to allow applicants to make contributions to our society. For example, the government may encourage people or applicants to do volunteer work, to more proactively take part in community services, and this is beneficial to our community. This can be one eligibility criteria. Also, subdivided units is one pain point in Hong Kong. There are still about 200,000 people living in subdivided flats. A lot of them are waiting to be allocated a PRH unit. Some of them, they cannot meet the criteria to apply for PRH units, so they can only keep renting SDU units. The latest policy address proposes the idea of basic housing units. To meet the standards, these basic housing units should be at least 8 square meter large. There should be separate windows and toilets, etc. But is it a way to tackle the problem with SDU units? As some members said, after the announcement of the new policy, some landlords of SDU units are kicking out the SDU tenants. Some tenants are worried that after the rolling out of basic housing units, they will see an increase in rent of SDUs. The government is rolling out a hotline service for SDU tenants. However, the government should explain to the public about the standards of basic housing units and address people's questions about this new policy. I believe that the air ventilation standards should be improved for SDU units. There are many substandard, subdivided flats in Hong Kong. For example, the structures of their walls may not be able to meet the standards. So while landlords may submit applications to have their flats to be regarded as basic housing units, they should get certification from professionals. For example, the government should check whether the structure of the walls have been altered in these flats. President Xi Jinping said that people in Hong Kong want to live in more spacious environment. Only with a home that is comfortable that people can live in peace. I hope the government can further enhance the housing ladder so that people see hope. Thank you. Professor Lau Chi-pang. Thank you, Deputy President. I speak in support of Mr. Vincent Chang's motion on further enhancing the housing ladder, as well as the amendments proposed by the other members. Over the past 10 to 20 years, housing has been an important issue in Hong Kong. If you look at the history in Hong Kong, we see that the government has been actively taking part in addressing the housing problem of the city. From the 1990s to, the 19th century to the 20th century, housing was not a big problem. Western people live in certain districts and Chinese people live in certain districts. Where we are now, all the way up to the peak as well as the whole Western district, there were Western people living in the districts. For Chinese people, they live near the central market and the western part of the area. It's better to have an accommodation than not. So, despite their living environment. So, you have a family of 10 or 20 living together in one narrow space. Some members might have seen before a very thin bed in housing units. And so we saw communicable diseases. So the government started to think about addressing the housing needs of Chinese people in Hong Kong. It was great that the previous term governments were trying to study that. The communicable diseases did not only affect the Chinese people, but also the Westerners in Hong Kong. While the government was trying to tackle the housing problem, we had the Japanese army invading Hong Kong. So we have to look at the post-war situation. back then, the financial position of the Hong Kong government was very different from that faced by the current term government. There weren't many policies to deal with the housing problem. Starting from 1945, within 6 months' time, we had an additional population of 500,000, and there were many immigrants flocking to Hong Kong back then. So people had to sleep on the streets. Sleeping on the streets was a very popular option among people. They tried to build their own shelters, and then we saw squatter homes. So people who lived higher up in the hill, they have to pay more. And so people started to go up the hill. On Hong Kong Island, from west to east, from south to north, we saw people trying to address their housing needs on their own. However, we saw fires in squatter huts. We saw a fire in Shek May. There were model housing estates. There were housing units built by the Housing Society. And with the fire in Shek May, the previous term government had to do something. And we had the 10-year housing project from the previous governor. And this laid a solid foundation for the housing in Hong Kong. Then we saw the development of the real estate market in Hong Kong. And that's why we see the current housing ladder. All this has to do with people's expectations. I so submit. I thank Vincent Chang for the motion. Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, Mr. Vincent Chang, you may now speak on the amendments. I thank Professor Lau for giving us the history lesson of Hong Kong. I thank all the members for proposing their amendments on my motion. I also thank the other 13 members for speaking on this topic and for their valuable views. Mr. Scott Leung said that we have to help those who can afford private housing to own their own homes. Dr. Wendy Hong said the government should provide incentives for the sandwich class to move up the housing ladder, and I agree on that. For Mr. Kenneth Leung, he said the government should help the sandwich class as well as the grassroots to buy their own homes, and there should be new types of homes to address the aging population problem. Again, I agree. A number of members have spoken about the basic housing units. I want to tell the Housing Bureau that it should explain more to the public about this policy. We have the tenancy control that ensures that SDU tenants can stay in their units for 4 years. If they get kicked out by their landlords, this is against the law. The government should enhance the housing ladder. It should speed up the upward mobility of people. If you still remember, in 2021, Mr. Xia Baolong, the director of Hong Kong and Macau Affairs, said we should phase out subdivided units. It's not easy to be able to do that. We should eradicate the worst type of subdivided units first and convert them into basic housing units. I hope we all can support that. Thank you.
Secretary for Housing. Deputy President, once again, I'd like to thank Mr. Vincent Chang for moving the motion and other amendments or other members for the amendments, who are Mr. Louis Leung, Mr. Man-kwong, Ms. Joephy Chan, Dr. Wendy Hong, Mr. Kenneth Leung, and Dr. Cheung-wing. I also thank other members who have given us invaluable advice on housing policy. Like I said in my opening remarks yesterday, since the terms of the government took office, we have been forward-looking. We stay on top of things, we think outside the box, and we strive to enhance quantity, speed, efficiency, and quality in solving housing problems, earnestly addressing people's concerns and difficulties in daily life. We try to respond to people's aspirations. Housing is a topic that concerns a lot of people in Hong Kong, as the department and bureaus that formulate policies, we attach a lot of importance to people's concerns. Today's motions is a response to the key initiative set out in the policy address, which is to enhance the housing ladder. I will now give a reply to the various comments and suggestions given by members regarding different types of housing. It is announced in this year's policy address that the government will establish a regulatory regime for basic housing unit through legislation. We're glad to learn that the community supports the proposal, while we are also aware of the concerns regarding the rehousing issue of subdivided unit households. As mentioned in Mr. Vincent Cheng's motion, we should carry out resident rehousing work properly. I'd like to stress that the basic housing unit that we propose is not just about renaming subdivided units. We have set minimum standards to eradicate substandard subdivided units. In the future, there will be registration systems with certification from professionals before a unit can be regarded as basic housing unit. Basic housing units is a name accorded to subdivided units that are up to standard. As I mentioned, we have identified enough land to meet housing demand in the next 10 years to shorten the waiting time for 40% of subdivided units who have applied for public rental housing and 20% of subdivided units households that may be eligible to be allocated a flat and leave their inadequate housing. The government, well, over the last 2 days, I hear members talking about the prolonged waiting time for public rental housing, but in fact, the waiting time of the past 5 years have decreased substantially. Compared to 2022, the number of applicants have dropped by 20%. For applicants below 30 years old, the number dropped by 46%. For single applicant aged below 30, the number of applicants dropped by 50%. This shows that we are shortening the waiting time for PRH units, and young people see alternatives on the market. The government will adopt a pragmatic, people-oriented, and progressive approach in taking enforcement action against renting out of substandard units. In order not to render SDU tenants who are not eligible for public rental housing and affected by enforcement action homeless, the government will help them identify other flats for rent on the market, including basic housing unit. We will also deploy other housing resources such as transitional housing, temporary shelter, and interim housing to house people in need. Ms. Joephy Chan, Mr. Piu Tang, and Mr. Chen Han Peng talked about their visits to transitional housing units, and they have come across cases where people were housed in transitional housing and have their living environment improved. For people living in inadequate housing, they already have a choice today. They can reach out to social workers to make a visit to transitional housing units. They could visit such housing in various locations. Social workers will be able to help these people be housed. Children would be affected negatively if they grow up in inadequate housing. There are dedicated NGOs that operate transitional housing, and that will help children grow up healthily. The government will press ahead with the establishment of the basic housing unit regulatory regime. Consultation for the regime will start December this year. Please give us your views to assist us in finalizing our regulatory system. As a lot of members have said, including Mr. Vincent Cheng, tenants today are protected by the LTCO already. If tenants are asked to move out unreasonably, please relay the case to the RNVD. We have a hotline, and we are carrying out investigation and initiating prosecution. Some 400 cases have been convicted. We will work together with the RNVD to take a proactive inspection, and we have inspected some 1,000 cases. Public rental housing is the first tier of a housing ladder providing affordable rental housing for grassroots people. Public housing resources are extremely precious, so we must ensure the rational use. On the one hand, we hear many people welcoming the tightening of the walled-off tenant policies. On the other hand, some members express concerns about the impact on the tenants. They suggest that we look into the impact caused to the tenants, and they have given us suggestions for consideration. It is our hope that the PRH tenants can accumulate wealth and improve their living conditions, thereby moving up the housing ladder. Therefore, the well-off tenant policy only applies to tenants who have lived in PRH units for 10 years, allowing them to recuperate. However, once tenants accumulate a certain amount of assets and capitals, they should move out. To ensure that public housing resources can be more focused on those with urgent housing needs. I believe that the Housing Authority will refer to objective data before making the final adjustments. They will also take into account the suggestions given by the member. At the same time, we will spare no efforts in combating the abuse of public housing. I hope everyone will join hands together to tackle the abuse of public housing, making our efforts more effective. The government understands that many people aspire to own their own home. Dr. Wendy and Dr. Kenneth LEUNG talked about the need to meet the housing needs of the sandwich class. Currently, subsidized sale flat and the starter home project are helping those in need to purchase homes. We will continue to review the supply and sales arrangements to respond to people's need. Just now, Mr. Man-kwong mentioned that we should revitalize the home ownership scheme secondary market. Last year, the Housing Authority optimized the financial arrangements for subsidized sale flats by extending the maximum mortgage guarantee period and repayment period, allowing buyers to secure mortgage loans. Following the implementation of these arrangements, the transaction volume of secondary SSF have significantly increased, facilitating the turnover in the secondary market. From March to September 2024, the total number of transactions for secondary SSFs was approximately 3,200, with an average of about 450 transactions per month. This figure compares to an average of about 230 transactions per month in the previous 12 months from March 2023 to February 2024, representing an increase of about 100%. Transactions of subsidized sale flat over 30 years old accounted for nearly 20% of the total, a rate much higher than the 8% in 2023. Furthermore, with the repayment period for secondary market mortgages extended to a maximum of 30 years, more than half of the buyers apply for a repayment period of 25 years or above while taking out their mortgages to purchase subsidized sale flats. We also agree with Mr. Man-kwong's suggestions to improve the quality of subsidized sale flat. The government stated in the 2022 policy address that all subsidized sale flats completed from the 2026-27 fiscal year onwards will have a gross floor area of no less than 26 square meters. The government and the Housing Authority are working towards this goal. Regarding public housing, looking ahead, we have reserved a 10% growth margin in our planning for the next decade to respond to societal demands for more spacious living environments. In response to Mr. Louis Leung's concern about the alienation restrictions on subsidized sale flats, we keep an open mind regarding the flat-for-flat pilot scheme for elderly owners. The Housing Authority has tightened, actually, the restrictions for both the HOS flats and GSH units since January 2022. The period for owners to resell their units in the secondary market at no more than the original price has increased from 2 years to 5 years, while the alienation restriction period in the open market has been extended from 10 years to 15 years to prevent speculation. To further assist people in owning their homes, the Housing Authority will gradually adjust the ratio of public housing and other subsidized sale flat from the current 70-30 to 60-40 over the next decade. The Housing Authority will allocate an extra ballot number to young family and one-person applicants under 40 years old for purchasing HOS flats starting from the next sale exercise. Also, starting from the next round of the White Farm HOS secondary market scheme, an additional 1,500 quotas will be allocated to young family and one-person applicants under 40 years old. We are open to other suggestions to increase the chances of applicants who have made multiple unsuccessful attempts to purchase subsidized sale flats. We will allocate an extra ballot number to them. If young families made 2 unsuccessful attempts, then their chances would increase by 60% under the new arrangements. Our long-term housing strategy is supported by data, and we have also made reference to the analysis done by the RNVD. So we are scientific in terms of our policies. Regarding the private housing market, the government will take responsibility in monitoring the supply situation of private housing and the transaction conditions after dispensing all the counter-cyclical measures on property management loans to maintain the stable development of the property market. Some members talked about issues relating to young people's home ownership and mortgages. The government attaches a lot of importance to helping young people purchase their own homes, and thus a series of measures have been introduced in the policy address. Our proposals specifically target young people interested in buying HOS flats, directly enhancing their opportunities for home ownership. And move up the housing ladder. I also understand that some young people are concerned about down payment. Currently, green farm applicants only have to pay 5% as down payment when purchasing HOS flats, while white farm applicants need to pay 10% down payment, which amount to only about $100,000 to $200,000. The Housing Authority provides mortgage guarantee of up to 90% and 95% of the unit purchase price for white and green farm applicants, respectively, to reduce their mortgage burden. Even for private residential units, under the current arrangements, a property priced below $10 million can secure a 90% mortgage. We are open to saving plans and will study them seriously. For example, compared to current investment options in the private market, such as bonds and funds, the amounts involved in savings plans are relatively small. We need to consider how to make savings plan practical and attractive. We also need to consider related issues such as whether the savings can only be used for purchasing specific types of properties or properties completed after a certain time. Promoting people's well-being is not just a slogan. It is the aspiration and vision of our housing policy. It is also our promise to the people. Housing policies are interconnected, and the current housing ladder has been refined through many years of hard work. Professor Lau Chi-pan has told us about the history of our housing policy. After listening to members' views today, my team and I will see if there is any room for further optimizing the housing letter so that we can write a better chapter for housing policy. I so submit. Thank you, Deputy President.
I now call upon Mr. Louis LOONG to move an amendment. President, I move my amendment. I propose the question to you that Mr. Louis LOONG's amendment be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the two groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Mr. Scott Leung, as the preceding amendment has been passed, you may move your further amendment. President, I move my further amendment. I propose the question to you that Mr. Scott Leung's further amendment be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the two groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Ms. Joephy Chen, as the preceding amendments have been passed, you may move your further amendment. President, I move my further amendment. I propose the question to you that Ms. Joephy Chen's further amendment be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the two groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Dr. Wendy Hong, as the preceding amendments have been passed, you may move your further amendment. President, I move my further amendment. I propose the question to you that Dr. Wendy Hong's further amendment be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the two groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Mr. Kenneth Leung, as the preceding amendments have been passed, you may move your further amendment. President, I move my further amendment. I propose the question to you that Mr. Kenneth Leung's further amendment be passed. Would those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the two groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Dr. Cheung-wing, as the preceding amendments have been passed, you may move your further amendment. President, I move my further amendment. I propose the question to you that Dr. Cheung-wing's further amendment be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the two groups of members present. I declare the amendment passed. Mr. Vincent Chang, you still have 2 minutes 45 seconds to reply, then the debate will come to a close. Mr. Vincent Chang. Thank you, President. I thank the 34 members who spoke yesterday and who spoke today for supporting the motion on enhancing the housing ladder. I agree with a lot of the views proposed by many members, especially enhancing the green form subsidized flat scheme. I also agree that we should help people move up the social ladder to enhance their sense of well-being. This is my 20th year in my political career. SDU is a major concern of mine. As I try to address the issue, I faced a lot of challenges. When I was a district councillor in Shamshui-Po, I saw that there were many SDUs, and people have been living in poor living environments. 5 to 6 years ago, when I tried to promote transitional housing, Lam Chun Street was my major project. Some told me that no one would live in transitional housing. We now have 30,000 LPH units. Some also told me that owners or landlords would greatly increase the rent. Now we have a tenancy control system. We also managed to prosecute a lot of the non-compliant landlords. I think what is crucial is we have the determination. We should not let people in Hong Kong to live in such poor living environments. In recent discussions, many people try to think about how we should set the standards for SDUs. I think all SDU landlords, they should think about whether their families would live in such poor environments. I think this should be the standard. I appeal to all SDU tenants, especially those with children, that they would take the important step. I hope you can all support my motion. I now put the question to you that Mr. Vincent Chang's motion as amended by Mr. Louis Leung, Mr. Scott Leung, Ms. Joephy Chen, Dr. Wendy Hong, Mr. Kenneth Leung, and Dr. Cheung-wing be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of each of the two groups of members present. I declare the motion as amended passed. I now adjourn the Council until 11 a.m. on Wednesday, the 13th of November 2024.